Welcome. This is a very different part of the world than where I've lived for the last 25 years. I did go to school at University of North Carolina for my undergraduate degree, so in this part of the world, but it's been a little while. So I know this room has a diversity of experience, so what I'm going to cover very briefly on interpretation, it may be review for some, and it may be new for others. Like everybody, I got to cover a lot in a short period of time. So anyway, I think there are some challenges for interpreting geology. For the most part, and this is a general rule, interpreters and the public are less familiar with geology than they are with some other interpretive topics. For many people, geology is foreign. There's an idea, the biophilia hypothesis, anybody who spent time in a park. And let me just say, when I use the term park, I mean any interpretive site. I'm just used to saying park. So like California condors at Grand Canyon, I think that's the easiest interpretive talk in the planet to do. You've got charismatic megafauna, you've got a compelling story, this big bird flies overhead. Easiest talk in the world, whereas a geology talk might be a little bit more challenging. Another challenging aspect of geology interpretation is the concept of geologic time. Steve was covering, a couple billion years worth of time. So the geologic time is very, very difficult. And there is also what I think is a Grand Canyon-sized gap between the basic literature, the introduction to Grand Canyon geology, and the technical literature on geology. And I think it is larger for the geosciences than some other scientific topics. On the flip side, I think there's a lot of opportunities in interpreting geology. If your park has scenery, you have geology. Do not be like Arches National Park, who a number of years ago told the NPS Geology Office that they did not have geology, they just had scenery. So please don't do that. They will never live that one down. Another thing to keep in mind, particularly with the number of historic sites, say Civil War, etc. sites here in the Southeast, is that history is subject to geology. Harpers Ferry, West Virginia, when I went there, I was knocked over by all the history there, but I was also knocked by the fact that, hey, this happened here because the Shenandoah and the Potomac rivers joined right there, and that was my takeaway message there. Things like EarthScope, and another opportunity for interpreting geology is that you really can increase scientific literacy in the public, which I think is a noble goal. And also you can excite the public about major research initiatives such as EarthScope as well. So what EarthScope does, it kind of tells the story behind the scenery. Many of you may have heard of that series of books, and in fact Bob Lilly used to say that interpretation tells a story beneath the scenery. Of how the landscapes came to be. And I think sometimes in parks we do take geology. For example, you go to a park and there might be a bear jam, there might be an elk jam where everybody stopped along the road and they're checking out the wildlife, but no one talks about geojams. And many national park areas have geojams, okay? Grand Canyon, for example, Acadia, Yellowstone, of course, those are all geojams. People are there for the geology, but that phrase is not out there in the interpretive world. So what interpretation is, I'm going to go back to the father of interpretation, Freeman Tilden. He wrote that book in 1957. First definition of interpretation, he got it really, really right. He says it's an educational activity that aims to reveal meanings and relationships rather than just to convey factual information. Facts are a part of it, but it's more than that. It's deeper than that. It's these meanings and relationships. The National Association for Interpretation, this is kind of the more modern definition, really communicating the same idea. It's a mission-based communication process that forges emotional and intellectual connections between the interests of the audience and the meanings of the resource. So successful interpretation has 4 components. It's a presentation technique that includes a ranger talk, it includes exhibits, it includes social media. You have to know your audience characteristics. You have to use interpretive methods, the steps that make the information relevant, and then of course you have to have resource information. So I'm going to introduce a model here called the PAIR model. that describes interpretation. The pair model uses a chain. Chains make connections, right? We're supposed to be working on an intellectual and emotional connection. When you use a chain is you get strong connections. You want to anchor. I think we want to anchor people and parks together. Another good characteristic of a chain is that they are flexible. And then also, every link in a chain has equal value. My high school basketball coach, and I did play high school basketball, it was a small school in more ways than one, is that a chain is only as strong as its weakest link, so each link has equal value. So the pair model has a chain between people, the visitors, the resource, the park, and so the 4 components are laid out, and this is what your handout is right there. So for P, the presentation techniques, this includes the delivery of the interpretive message. And it includes a ranger walk, a ranger talk, a tour of a historic site. It could be an interpretive canoe trip. It's a wayside exhibit, it's a museum exhibit, it's a roadside exhibit, it's social media, it's a tweet, it's a Facebook post, it's a video, it's anything and everything. So P includes choosing the right interpretive method and then using it effectively. Secondly is audience characteristics. Important thing to know is audiences are diverse, kids are different than adults, different educational background and different interests. For example, my sister loves archaeology. She comes visit me in the Southwest. I got to take her to some Indian ruins. That makes her trip. Meanwhile, I'm like, ho-hum, let's go look at the geology. So it's very important to keep in mind audience characteristics. And so you must design an interpretive product with your audience in mind. And most interpretive audiences do not have technical expertise in the subject that you're communicating. There are exceptions to this, but as a general rule, most interpretive audiences are not technical experts. So at this point, I want to say a little word between the difference in the way brains works between experts and novices. And all joking aside, is that experts really do see the world differently than novices. Okay, experts see more details, they see relationships that novices, people who are unfamiliar with the topic, don't. So my take-home message is to try to think like a visitor, think like your audience, okay? I work in resource management now, so I spend most of my time working with fisheries biologists, with botanists, with archaeologists, and they're throwing out their lingo and whatnot, and I'm like, huh, what are you talking about? And then to get them to understand the difference is, hey, do you know what mafic means? And these biologists and archaeologists are like, what? What word is that? They've never heard it before. I'm like, okay, that's my jargon, so I'm not using it with you. Please don't use your jargon with me or with the public in many cases. So think like a visitor, think like your audience. And sometimes it's not so much what you want to tell the audience, but what they want to know. And sometimes it's finding the connection between the two. If, you know, in my case, I've got a resource management issue. They're interested in condors because they're cool and they fly over, and I want to tell them about how lead from ammunition is killing some of the birds. The interpretive message is a revelation step. This is how you make your information relevant to the diverse audiences. It typically includes a theme. Talk very briefly about what a theme is. It tells you, so what, why does it matter? And it uses specific tools, whether it's humor, whether it's storytelling, analogies, and so on. And you want to incorporate intellectual and emotional aspects. So what is a theme? A theme is a central message or the main idea that your entire interpretive product or program relates to and it communicates. It's in some ways your slogan. Sometimes I look at interpretive theme as the packaging of the information. Everything you say in an interpretive program should relate back to your theme. And it really answers the question, so what? So an example of a EarthScope related theme from the West is a basin and range is a land of faults and fires whose stark landscape's origin clearly reveals the dynamic Earth processes that shape our planet and our lives. A good theme typically relates a tangible resource, something you can touch, an object, a place, a person, an event, can be discerned with your physical senses. An example of a tangible would be the Washington Monument, which is a good tangible for the earthquake about a year and a half ago because it was damaged. A seismometer also can be a good tangible, a physical object. An intangible resource is a system, a process, a relationship, a feeling, value. It's fun, it's having fun. That photo up there, my buddy Richard was actually taken in a wilderness area. That's a intangible as well. Hazards are fairly intangible. So a hazard map and subduction, a process, would be another example of an intangible. There's a subcategory of intangible resources, and these are universal concepts. These are intangibles that relate to everyone. Intangibles, I think, work really, really well when you're doing human history. You know, you got fear, you've got love, you've got danger, you've got hardship, but many of these also relate to geology, for example, hazards, danger, for example. Beauty is a big universal, and so on. Some workshops were held a few years ago to develop EarthScope primary themes, and so the EarthScope experiment, that would be your tangible, exemplifies the insatiable human desire to learn. Desire to learn would be your intangible. And then another one is EarthScope, there's your tangible, encourages a feeling of national interconnectedness. We're all related here by inviting people to be involved in the experiment and fostering an understanding within their local environment and how their culture interacts with the dynamic Earth system. So back to the pair model, resource information. I like to look at resource information R as the building blocks of Interp. It includes all technical levels from the very basic, sometimes to the advanced. It's important to be accurate. Again, when I'm dealing with resource managers, they always want all the details in there, and I'm like, hey, sometimes it's okay to be accurate but not precise. You don't necessarily need every detail about every fish you caught in your removal of non-native trout in the park. We can summarize this real quickly. Sometimes it's real important to place this in context. For example, at Grand Canyon, the Colorado River, one thing we frequently do is compare its size to, let's say, the Mississippi River. So it gives people some sort of frame of reference. And I know it's hard to do with seismologists, but avoiding acronyms is sometimes a good thing with the public, and jargon, or if you use jargon, define it, explain what MAFIC means. It takes a couple of words to explain what it is, so either avoid it or define it as you go along. So if you want to summarize this, interpretation is pairing people with parks, okay, and that describes the outcome of good interpretation is that people in parks are connected, they are paired together. A definition of pair is to become associated with one another. So interpretation is the right information conveyed via the right method or techniques to the right audience using the right information. So there's more than one model for interpretation. The National Park Service folks have seen this model here. The interpretive equation where knowledge of the resource plus knowledge of the audience plus appropriate techniques equals interpretive opportunities. These two models say the same thing. KR equals R in this model. The resource information, knowledge of the resource equals A in this model, and the only difference is that appropriate techniques is broken apart into presentation techniques and interpretive methods, which I think are different. So interpretation is relevation based on information. You want to increase significance. This is just real simple relative scale. You want to increase information, but it's not just increasing information. It's not like, oh wow, that's cool. It's not just a textbook. It's both. It's revelation based on information. So you want the vector going in that direction. A neat thing about these workshops is it brings people with different expertise together. I think the strengths of professional interpreters is that they're really good in presentation techniques. They're really, really good interpretive methods. Those are interpretive strengths. Scientist strengths tends to be the resource information. So when you bring us together, we're stronger as a group, which is, I think, the real strength of these workshops. So I want to end with a quote by Ed Abbey, very famous author for my part of the world out in the West. And the moral that he labors towards in one of his books is that landscapes, any landscapes, are best understood by poets, interpreters who have their feet rooted in data, and by scientists who've not lost their sense of wonder. And so a good interpreter must have their feet planted in solid resource information and data, and a good scientist must convey that sense of wonder with the public. So this is our opportunity to work together to find interpretive meanings and values in the EarthScope experiment.